Welcome, everyone. Glad to have you here today. Today, we're going to talk about a topic that should be near and dear to everyone's heart, and it's the how to negotiate our contracts. Okay, so I'm gonna try and make sure that I'm talking to everybody in the way that they are contracting. So I'm again, whether you're a subcontractor for a major
Oh, it's new.
contractor. Oh, give me one sec. Need
Good,
everybody.
man. I know it's been.
Or you're working a contract with a homeowner or a commercial client. A lot of these rules will apply universally, and it's going to be something that we want to keep in mind, especially as we've moved into an uncertain climate, right? So depending on where you are, some of us are experiencing recession-like times. This is especially important during these times that we are focused and making sure that we are taking care of our contractual obligations. So, with that said, can you guys see my screen okay? Should be able
Yep.
to see my slides, yeah? All right, right on. Let's get into this. All right. So, we're going to talk about the do's and don'ts of construction contract negotiation. All right. Um, and we want to talk about risk to revenue in every agreement. All right. So, let's start off with the beliefs. All right. So, most contractors believe that contracts are just paperwork to get started. Most contractors that I encounter or work with, even the established ones, have very poor contract language. Okay, they have very poor terms that leave things in a vague situation and don't use their contracts as leverage. For God's sakes, guys, your contract is a tool, right? You are a contractor. We should be using our contracts to diffuse and to help in situations in our work, right? So we can actually use them as tools and de-escalate, bad clients. We can use them in a lot of different ways. And hopefully today I can kind of bring this up. They're not just paperwork. It's not just paper that you redundantly put down, because these are the things that can protect us, and especially in those situations we're not anticipating, right? And when we have bad contracts, I can promise you we have lost profit, wasted time, and endless amounts of stress. All right. So it's not a matter of if you have a problem, it's when you have a problem. All right. And when you have a problem, it's our contracts in a lot of cases that can protect us and, help us to even reserve a good customer. Okay. Oh, so what it's costing you, and in a lot of cases, and I'm going to start with the easiest, lowest hanging fruits. All right. But, not having a good change order process and not having that, clearly defined in your contract. Not having, what's included and what's not included in your scope that belongs with your contract. This is huge, right? And this ultimately always leads to the same thing. We end up losing money. We also end up losing trust and respect from our customer. And in most cases, if not all, we're looking at financial losses. Okay. So let me give you a quick example of a client that we just recently worked with. I'm going to give you some examples of even contract clauses I'm using today in my own business. All right. But we had a contract, one of our clients on a 65K contract. And ultimately, in his contract, because he was vague about what was not included, all right. He was roped into almost $12,000 in change work orders, which the client refused to pay. Okay. And basically, this can happen to just about anybody. But had he taken the time to include what was not included, although it was talked about verbally, it was discussed, it was very clear amongst his customer, but it wasn't in the actual contract. So when the time came for final payment and he requested the change work order work, um, and the customer basically disputed it, and they were successful in not having to pay those change work orders. So, and I think this happens a lot. Even in your contract, you need to have clauses that retain to how you handle and how you manage change work orders. Okay. So again, we're going after the lowest hanging fruits. I'm going to give you guys some other ideas on how to use this, but yeah, Wyatt, I see your hands up. What's up?
Yeah, I was just gonna reference as well for what you were saying. Last year, when I first got started my construction company, I made that mistake, and it
Hmm.
cost me over 20 grand. It was a change order that the city said they wouldn't give the occupancy letter. We were already there. We didn't sign contracts or anything. It was just a verbal agreement. And
Hmm.
then when it came down to it, we gave them the bill for 20 grand. They said that they didn't pay. They didn't weren't going to pay it because there was no
Yep.
other evidence. So it
I've
cost me material and labor time that we lost over all of our profits that we made from that job after
mhm.
spending 2 months there went towards paying for their change order.
100%. 100%. I've seen
So
it countless times. So, and again, we want to think of our contracts as our leverage. All right. So, do we follow them completely to the word? I mean, you certainly can, but when there is a dispute between two people, the last thing that you want is to have it be he said, she said. Okay? Because again, from the legal perspective, it's the only thing that's going to matter in court is what's in that contract, right? What was agreed to, all right, from the onset. So when we get into these situations and it happens so quickly, all right, where we're all in good spirits at the beginning, and then as the contract progresses, now we have a dispute. And most of the time, unfortunately, if you're going the legal route, it's never nobody's winning in that situation, right? We want to avoid legal litigation, which is one of the most expensive types of law in the world. We want to always avoid litigation, okay? And a lot of times how you're wording your contracts and the terms and conditions you have there can very much avoid litigation. So we think that the contract is actually most of the time in case we get sued or in case legal trouble comes along. But in fact, most of the time it's preventative. All right, you can prevent a ton, and I mean an absolute metric ton of disputes and people with the wrong ideas with the terms in your contract. And we're going to go through some of those today. All right. So, profit is designed, it's never assumed. Okay. Your contract frames the entire job. If it's weak, everything cracks under pressure. All right. So again, the terms, the conditions, how you proposed everything, how that contract runs is really again the single source that we can come back to that is truth. All right. We should not be leading our jobs again by verbal
10, 11,
agreements
12,
and
13, 14. Yeah,
oh,
that's still.
a second. Hey guys, if you could do me a favor, if can
Oh,
you all put yourselves on mute just in case? So we don't get those popping up. Okay. So there's five steps to profit protecting contracts. All right. So first of all, for guys that are um, and this will apply to like guys doing ICI, industrial commercial, where you're signing a main contract or somebody that's working as a subcontractor. All right, we want to always make sure that we're pre-negotiating our scopes and exclusions. Okay, can't stress this enough. Even if you're a residential with a homeowner, all right, it's so important and it takes no extra time or effort today. And you can use, ChatGPT, you can use AI in a pinch for this, but always remember, it's not what we clearly put up as that's going to be the problem. It's what we don't say. It's what the customer was expecting and didn't see. All right. So maybe they expected a certain upgrade and it's not clear or it's vague in your contract. All right. These are really important things that we want to pre-negotiate. We want to explain to them what our change work order process is and how we're going to handle that. All right. We want to stick to that. We also want to make sure that, again, the expectations are set straight with our contract so that we can always say, hey, you know what? We're going to follow the contract. We're going to follow the terms. We're going to follow this so that we don't have actual disputes. Okay. And time again, you can challenge me on this all you want, but disputes end up escalating. They end up, always in the end being at least a point of dissatisfaction from a customer. All right. With a good structured contract that does include all of this clearly, all right, it reduces that friction. It reduces that dissatisfaction, even if it's not in their best interest, even if they didn't win that situation. So maybe I can give you a good example of this We have a particular clause in our contract that completely states that we're not responsible for oil canning. We do metal roofing, for example, and I probably use that clause 12 to 15 times a month. All right. When a customer is irate about oil canning, maybe they've seen a little bit of oil canning in the sun, whatever, their first step is that they think it's a deficiency. They think it's something wrong with the material, the way we installed it. And what do you think their first comments are to us? Well, you got to replace that. That's where we pull out our contract and we go, no, actually, that's a perfectly natural thing that happens, and we're not going to replace it. And in fact, you agreed to the original terms that we're not responsible for it. Okay. On the other hand, if I didn't have that term in my agreement, you can imagine how many people would not pay their bill because they were unsatisfied with a little bit of oil canning here and there. Okay. So again, this has led to me not saving, but protecting my profits on many, many hundreds, if not thousands of jobs at this point. Okay. So the other area that we can be very clear about, all right, is change order clauses. Okay. So having a clause on how you're going to handle a change order and that you're entitled to change orders is the first step, right? It should be a part of every single agreement that you have. And I'm going to give you guys an SOP today with a clear explanation of how we deal with it, as well as some clauses. By the way, just a disclaimer. Anything that you get from me is not legal or binding. I'm not a lawyer, all right? You are obligated to take it to your own attorney. I'm not giving you legal advice. Simply speaking from a place of an experienced contractor that uses contracts as a tool on a daily basis. Okay, so these other things would also include clauses that would dictate what fees could be. All right. So for example, if a client stops a job for a reason that's not related to what you're doing, should there be a fee for that? If a client has a dispute with you and refuses to pay, okay, that's a good clause to have in your contract, that no matter what, if we have a dispute, it's not a reason to stop payment. And I'll give you a example of that contract. Very, very important that we're having those things in. Okay. Now, I'll be honest with you. I would say that maybe a small percentage of my clients, including lawyers, believe it or not, that don't read the contract completely throughout, at the onset, at the beginning. Okay. And you can probably expect the same thing. So I get a lot of comments about the type of language and how lengthy our contracts are, and and what's really important here is that we understand that those things, in a lot of cases, are used after the fact, after something's happened, is how we're going to manage a situation. Okay, so don't be afraid of having a contract that is detailed in the clauses and the terms, as long as you completely understand those terms and clauses. Don't be putting in language or terms and conditions that you do not fully understand, okay? That you're not fully committed to executing. So, meaning, don't just take a template from me today, slap it on yours without understanding what those terms and conditions mean, all right? And then present it to every customer you have. All right? That's not what I'm suggesting here. I'd much rather you have 10 or 15 clauses that you completely understand and that you understand the language to, okay? And that you can execute on and that you can practice, than you just having, redundant or misleading information in your contracts. That's not going to be helpful. All right? We want to also avoid vague language. All right? So vague language is things like to be decided. All right? Don't put those in your contracts. All right? As needed. Don't put that in your contract. Right? What is that opening the door for? Anybody? Anybody have an idea what we're opening the door for? Okay. It would be misinterpretation, right? So again, if you take a contract to a judge or a lawyer, and heaven forbid it gets to that point, all right, these are the kind of things that have your entire contract voided, all right, where the terms and conditions are not clear or the language is not clear, all right. Same with very, very complicated legal language. I've actually seen and know of case study or cases where the terms and conditions were so complicated that they deemed them void. All right, that even the judge was unable to interpret what the language was saying. So again, don't you want to write these terms and conditions, and this is more instructions for your counsel as well, that anybody that you're presenting them to can also understand them. Okay. And I think that's probably, a very important thing that all of us should keep in mind is that contracts are not meant for the lawyers as much as they're meant for reducing misunderstandings or protecting and making sure that your client's experience is good and that they're getting everything that you've obligated yourself to. All right. So when we use really unnecessary language, that confuses things, right? We don't want confusion. We want clarity. All right. Payment triggers with milestones. Okay. So payment schedules. I can't stress this enough, guys. If you want to use a clause like, that no matter the dispute, that they have to make payments as per the schedule, you'd best have a payment schedule in your contract. All right. Everybody should have a payment schedule in their contract, minus the guys that are doing small service related work or smaller contracts where they're paid at the end, but still the payment terms need to be there. Okay. Again, simple things, but very, very important. And as you grow as a contractor, you're going to find that you should be tying your payment terms to particular milestones in your schedule. Okay. A couple of reasons for that is cash flow, knowing, where you are on your contract. Again, this has never been easier nowadays with all the software available, but it all ties back to a payment schedule. Miss this step. All right, you're going to have cash flow problems, but you're also going to have, in a lot of cases, unhappy or unsatisfied customers. Okay. And the best example I can give you of this is giving a customer frequent smaller payments. All right. Ultimately leads to a higher, more satisfied customer. Okay. It also avoids a lot of the unnecessary problems that can come from leaving a large balance towards the end or having rush payments go through because that creates some mistrust no matter what. And when we have mistrust, then there's always a potential to have disputes, and we don't want disputes. A contract's meant to eliminate disputes. Okay. Here's the other thing. We don't sign. So this is more for our subcontractors and for guys, in the commercial side. We don't blindly sign our clients' contracts. Okay, I can't stress this enough. I certainly did it in my early days, but again, when someone presents you with a contract you must sign, it's so important nowadays to review that contract and actually have a discussion on what you're going to accept and what you're not going to accept. So let me give you a good example of what you do not accept. Paid when get paid. Anybody heard this clause or seen this clause in their contract before? I'm sure many of you have, but anybody in particular have seen this recently? The paid when get paid term or condition. No? Okay. So let me explain this. This is primarily a ICI or a commercial application. I've seen it, just about on every field, but this basically means that, if you're working for a general contractor or a prime contractor, that no matter what happens in the job, be it their problem or be it something another trade caused, all right, if the owner refuses to pay, all right, for whatever reason beyond your control, all right, they only have to pay you when they get paid. This could be months, this could be years, this could be never. All right. And you have no recourse with the person who contracted you to that job. Who thinks that's fair? Right? Many a cash flow problems can occur there, right? So this is a contract clause that I immediately scratch out and kind of chuckle to myself about, never signing that particular term. And again, I'm very direct. Our policy is clear. We do not agree to those terms ever. All right. Payment terms that are unfair to your business. So from a cash flow perspective, all right, where they're being unclear, those are things you scratch. Okay. You only agree to the terms and conditions that you completely understand. So if they're using language in the contract, all right, that is requires a high level of sophistication and legal knowledge, all right, scratch them. Get them out of there, have them removed. Ask the contractor as well as if they even understand what those terms are. I can't tell you how many times I've asked a main contractor explain to me what their clause referred to, and they couldn't do it. All right. Those aren't things that we're going to agree to. And it takes a limited amount of time, especially if you're going to use ChatGPT these days to kind of analyze what those things include. And this is when you're signing someone else's contract. All right. But the point that I'm trying to make here is we don't just blindly sign contracts. This can get you into a lot of trouble. And in a lot of cases, depending on the job, this could end your business. All right, that's how serious it is. Again, and I've seen some nasty clauses I've both experienced and had executed on myself and my clients that no one should ever agree to. Right? So, a couple of things that I want to make really simple. All right. So for you guys that are using ChatGPT, again, I'm going to put a disclaimer. It is not a legal tool. Okay. So don't try and expect it to. It's a good place to start. All right. It's a good place to get, things in a pinch, out that you need to. All right. But we can all ask ChatGPT to draft a payment schedule for the 40K remodel, and then maybe you give them the scope of work. All right. That's an easy, quick win for you guys. Write a clause for billing delays in change orders. Okay. We can ask ChatGPT to do that. Now, you would have to get those obviously reviewed. All right. But in a pinch, they work better than having nothing at all. Okay. Create what's not included list for a kitchen renovation. So again, having the discussion with your client, what's included, what's not included. All right, making sure that if you've had a discussion of what's not included, that you don't just leave it as a discussion, you actually put it in your contract. That way, they can't come back to that and say that you didn't have that conversation. Okay, can't tell you how many times that happens, right? And that's the reason for not paying and disputes and delays, and all of this is just crushing your profits. Okay, so verbal approvals, let's just say, and no structure. Okay, so meaning that you have a contract that you is incomplete, or you don't understand, or it's stolen from someone else that you don't understand the terms and are incapable of using the tools that are within that contract. All right. Or worse, we just go with verbal agreements. Okay. And then after, right, we have 96% of our change orders approved before work, right? 27K net added in a 12 months. So again, I'm using this as an example of our client that ran into this situation before where he was losing 12K on a 65K contract. We did some very minor changes, by the way. I've included that if you guys want to grab the resources in the chat. There is a change work order policy that we built for him, as well as some clauses around change work orders. But safe to say now, in the last 6 months since we helped him out with these particular issues, that he's got 96% of his change work orders approved before they start work. Okay, when do you have the best leverage on a change work order? That's a pretty easy question. Who can answer that for me? Wyatt, let me pick on you. When do you have the best leverage on a change work order?
Sorry, I was trying to mute myself. You said when I have the best leverage?
Yeah, when do you have the best leverage on a change work order?
When the problem first appears.
Perfect. And in terms of getting your change work order approved, okay, should we apply the same strategies and tactics that we would do to get the job? So speed to lead, speed to change work order. Do you think that would be in your best interest?
Yeah, because it's causing a problem and delaying the job, so you need to get it dealt with
Perfect.
immediately so you can move forward.
Perfect. So, and when do you think the client is most open to agreeing to those change work orders?
Under pressure.
Well, not so much under pressure, but at the moment that they occur, right?
Yeah, true.
So again, if you want to lead your customer in your project, all right, being prompt with your change work orders, presenting them before the work begins, I can't stress it enough, okay,
Mhm.
is going to lead to a higher customer satisfaction, a higher trust with your client because they were given the opportunity to say no, all right, versus waiting until you've gotten through it and then having a dispute over the amount of the change work order. Okay. So giving your customer the opportunity to review it, to look at it, and discuss it with you. And if there are alternatives, that's always a better way of protecting both you and your customer. Okay. But
Hmm.
again, like I said, these are things that as contractors, they tend to get missed, all right, or not done well, right? So quick wins, what to do today. Um, I want you guys all, and everybody can do this, what's included, what's not included section in your next proposal. Okay, the easiest, quickest win that you can possibly add to yourself. The other best thing that you can do with this, by the way, as a caveat, is those extras that they were considering. All right. If you're doing upsells, if you've got a more advanced sales structure, all right, I know we certainly use them. I always put them on what's not included, right there in the contract. Why am I doing that, do you think? Right? The things that they've declined, right? So upgrades. Why do you think I'm doing that? Why did I see you there? And answer this for me.
Uh, um, I guess I don't quite understand the question other than, for instance, I have a client that we are doing a remodel for right now, and part of something that they said that they're going to purchase was going to be the doors and cabinets.
Ooh, that's a no-no.
Um, and so
Already
I
red
did,
flag.
yeah. Um, I did go ahead and say yes to that because they were purchasing them. I already had the floor plan, but we put in our contract that we are not supplying the materials for the doors and cabinets.
So I would also put that we are not responsible for damage caused to those supplied pieces, right? Or management of the installation.
Okay.
So the reason why is they could fully bring you a damaged product and then blame you for it being damaged,
Hmm.
right? So, and again, I've literally dealt with this week. So again, and it happens, right? Maybe they've had it kicking around for a while. All of a sudden, you go to install, you're not making a profit off the install to begin with, really, because it's just labor only. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
And now you're being forced to buy a new, whatever it is, because it came damaged. Okay. So
Okay.
also having a management fee. So again, you should have in your contracts, all right, an agreed to hourly rate for managing, certain activities they request, right? I'm going to share that agreement with you guys as well. Um, and basically, again, it keeps everything absolutely clear on, what happens in certain circumstances. So in mine, if anyone supplies material, which is almost never, because we don't offer that, we're not responsible for how that material gets to site, none of that stuff. We're not picking it up, we're not handling it. All right. It's solely on them. And how it gets installed, we're going to do our best, but we're not responsible for that either. All right.
Okay.
And
Did
see how
I
quickly
did
they decide not to do that because they're cutting into your profit margins doing it, number one, but more importantly, there's a good saying for this. You don't dive for a falling sword, right?
Gotcha. I was asking, did I answer your question?
Yeah, so yeah, my question's more, more related to what we were just discussing, so it's okay. Um, use email for written change order approvals. Okay, so again, making sure that that we're getting them signed, we're getting them agreed to. Email is considered still a legal binding agreement. Okay. And the other quick win, I want you guys all to add a 3% late payment fee
La oficina. En la
to
oficina.
clauses after that are over 15 days. Okay. So, and I'm going to go through a couple of clauses and how we can use those and leverage them in the situation that, we have a dispute on a project. Okay. So we got to make sure that we're using written contracts every time. All right. Anybody have a clause that you wish you had last year? Has anybody had a clause today? And this is kind of leading up to where I'm going with this, but does anybody have a clause that they have now that they wish they had last year? No? Okay. I figured it would be rather silent on that. So, um, what I'm going to do is we're going to go through some of the resources I've changed, and I'm going to show you actual clauses and terms and conditions that I have in mind, my own personal agreement. all right, that I didn't have last year and the reasons why I have them. Okay. And I want you guys to remember in every single job that you do, in every single contract that you're in, all right, there's always a new lesson to be learned, right? There's always a situation that comes up that maybe you haven't experienced for. And I mean, I've been doing this now. This is my 24th season in my particular business, and we still are learning new things. We're still updating contracts. We're still customers are finding ways to, surprise us. All right, but there's a good metaphor for how we need to look at our business at all times, right? You know, when mistakes or problems happen, all right, if we don't learn from those mistakes, if we don't do something actively to prevent them from happening, we're doomed to repeat them again. All right. And for a lot of you, I think if you really look carefully, you've probably repeated the same mistake that comes to your contracts over and over again, and it's cost you a ton of profit, time, energy, and honestly, it kills momentum, right? When we have to deal with those disputes. Even when you win, even when you're right, okay, these disputes still take your energy. They take your time, all right? They're vampires. We don't want vampires in our business anywhere. Okay? So let's go ahead. We'll open up this. And by the way, guys, take advantage of this resource that I've provided for you guys. And I'm going to share my recent. And you guys see this? Should say nature of the service provided. Yes,
Yep,
no?
it's there.
Okay, cool. All right. So let's go through. So the first clause I was just telling you guys about oil canning. All right. This is in every single agreement that I have. All right. And then from a place of negotiating contracts. All right. This isn't something I'm willing to negotiate with a client. All right. And in fact, if I'm doing work and I'm signing someone else's agreement, I make sure that my language gets inserted into their contract or I'm not willing to do the job. All right? Because this one alone, without it, I would have no rebound if they chose that it was a deficiency. And again, in the eyes of a judge or in court, it's a gray area, and I've been through it. All right, I've lived through these clauses, so I know them very intimately. They have pain attached to them. All right. And I've had a ruling that went against me when I didn't have this particular clause in there. All right? Because again, it's up to interpretation if that's a deficiency or not, if not properly, communicated in the contract. Okay? So again, like I said, I'm dealing with steel. You can't control oil canning 100%. All right? And a customer obviously sees it as an aesthetic issue, all right, rather than a performance issue. So we have a clause there specifically about oil canning. Okay. I'm going to pull out some ones that would be really important for most of you guys to have. All right. Here's one. A one-sided attorney's fee clause. Right? Does anybody have a one-sided attorney fee clause? Maybe give me a one in the chat. I know some of my clients should have. Okay. So what would a one-sided attorney fee clause mean? Basically, it means that if there was a dispute, all right, and we had to go to court, whoever wins in court is going to pay the other person's legal fees. Okay? So when I'm having a dispute, before it goes to court, before it becomes a litigation matter, all right, I always like to inform my customer politely and professionally that this is what they would be facing if they chose, the route that they're going to go. Right. So give you a real easy example. The client has decided not to pay their bill because they feel that oil canning was a deficiency that they, is not what they expected. Okay, no problem. Totally understand. And you're entitled to your own opinion. But I want to let you know, okay, if this dispute escalates any further and you do not make your payment or you do not, pay in full, all right, that I'll be entitled to a one-sided attorney fee. And I got to inform you ahead of time that, litigation lawyers are very expensive and I like to use the best. right? So my attorneys are going to be about 1,500 bucks an hour. All right. Is this really something that we can't manage together? We can't resolve between us before it goes there? All right. Again, that's what we call leverage. All right. So before it becomes a legal matter, before it gets to a point where, either side can't resolve it, a lot of times you can use your own contract to de-escalate, all right, to bring people back down to a negotiating space. Okay. But failed to put those things in, and now it's up for interpretation, and you can see things escalate very quickly. Okay. Change work orders. Again, very important clause, laying out how it needs to be presented. And again, we put a clause in here that ultimately allows us to take on the work or do the work in the situation, all right, and we will be compensated. So if someone gives us a verbal cue, let's say, for example, they had, a roof that was rotted and we had to move quickly before the rain came, all right, we have a clause in there that allows us to at least have the language around change work order so they can't dispute it. Okay. The payment to contractor, right? So payment to contractor is an absolute independent obligation, okay? Provided that the contractor has not maternally breached the agreement, customers shall not withdraw any part of the agreement amount for which the payment is due under the agreement on the account of, oh, on the account of alleged existing insurance claims unless previously authorized by the contractor in writing. Okay. So again, everybody should have a similar clause. And basically what this means and what this is saying is even if we have a dispute and you're unhappy with a certain portion of the work, you cannot withhold payment. All right. If you choose to withhold payment or not make the payment schedule, all right, now I'm going to use the leverage of the other pieces in my contract, and then there's quite a few. All right. And again, I can take away warranties. I can not be responsible for the work. I can stop work. Okay. So again, many of you guys don't realize, and until you've been into the situation, but in some cases, a contractor, if not properly stated, all right, let's say you're working for a GC, they could withhold payment for any reason they want. And then if you stop work, they have terms in their thing that they can, that you would be in breach of contract. Okay, so imagine that. All right, they choose not to pay you for your work and then put you in a breach of contract, all right, for stopping work. That's not very fair, right? And a lot of you guys could be in the same situation yourself, all right? This is an old trick that a lot of even I've seen homeowners pull. All right, I've seen established contractors fall for is again, when is it appropriate and when are you able to actually stop work? When would you be subject to maybe liquidated damages, right? So you had to stop work because the homeowner didn't make his payment on time, all right, and now he's suing you for his project being behind because you didn't have any language or terms that laid that out. Okay, and this is very possible in most states and definitely in the provinces. Actually, Greg shared with me a clause that I'll share with you guys in a little bit. But again, here's another situation. Okay, so the owner never made full payment to you, right? They shorted you your change work orders. Maybe they didn't pay in full. Okay, immediately when that happens in my business, they have no warranty. All right, meaning I'm not responsible for any work that happened there. Okay. And I can't believe how many times I've had to lean on this particular one. All right. And good examples of it is, again, maybe we, started the project, the owner was unable to make their payments and we terminated the contract. Okay. Anything that we had in place, technically, without a clause that properly states it, we are accountable or responsible for. Okay. So imagine that homeowner stiffs you for money. Okay. Doesn't pay the full contract as agreed, but you're now on the hook for any warranty issues and they can create a lawsuit on top of that. Right. They can bring in other people a year, 2 years down the road and you're totally liable for it. Okay. So again, you want to tie that to, if the payment wasn't made, or, when the situation is that warranty work would not be included. Okay. Here's another one for you guys, and I'll share a quick story about that, about this particular one and why it's here. All right. Does anybody know? I'm sure you guys would be familiar with it, but like, how many of you guys are using your clients' photos of their properties, photos of their, the work that you've done for them?
I am.
Okay, lots of you are. Okay, so let me give you a quick story about this. I had a client was absolutely thrilled. Okay, with our work, we used the photos. We verbally asked him for permission. He even did a an ad for us, right? So he got on camera and gave us a review. Okay. Um, Flash forward, 3 years later, there was a severe ice storm that ended up damaging part of his roof, and he made a demand of me to replace that portion of the roof, even though it was 100% an insurance related issue. Okay. And when I refused, he sued me. All right. But not for the damage to the roof, for not having permission to use the photographs I used in all my advertising. All right. This lawsuit, and he was successful with it, cost me about 12 grand. Okay. So, 3 or 4 times the repair, but because I did not have it in my contract. So this term, this condition here that you're seeing is about 2 years old. Okay. And anybody that's using, images or using, collateral for your marketing from somebody else's home, know this: if you don't have it clearly defined of who owns it and what you're entitled to do with it, you are wide open for lawsuits. Okay? Copywriting, all types of things that can be pulled into this. So make sure that you have a clause, all right, that releases you of liability around, sharing photos. Another story I can share with you real quick on this one, was a subcontractor. Okay, started using our client's photographs as his main marketing. All right, subcontractor did the job for us. He actually didn't even do the install, which was bizarre. All right, and all of a sudden, the client starts seeing their home, popping up all over the internet, and obviously very very upset with this. We had this particular client was a Supreme Court judge, and obviously, you cannot share a Supreme Court judge's property address or anything that indicates where they're located, their home, any of that. Okay. Again, because I had the clause, I didn't get sued to the hills. But again, in that situation, I also had leverage with the subcontractor who did not have the permission. So I was able to get all of it removed, and we were able to come to a settlement that didn't cost me money, but the subcontractor that used the photographs without permission. Okay, so again, you want to make sure you're being clear in your subcontractor agreements as well. These are the same things. Okay, now interest and collection costs in the event of non-payment. Okay, again, how much are you guys charging when someone doesn't pay you? Right, being clear about this. Why do we want to be clear about this in the very beginning of a contract? It's because if they're thinking about not paying you, you can now use this as leverage, right? Hey, Mrs. So and so, when we started this contract, you agreed to these terms and conditions. I just want to let you know that if this proceeds any further, that I'm going to be adjusting your bill with 1.5, 2.5, whatever's legal in compounded interest. And this could look like XYZ per month. All right. So if you decide to dispute this and it takes us 2 to 3 years, I'm totally happy with that. All right. I welcome it. Please let me lien your property and earn that kind of interest rate, compounded monthly. All right. Because I'm not getting that from my own investments. So I'll gladly take it from yours. Right. Do you think that would slow somebody's decision making? Maybe change the conversation back to a more negotiable terms? Of course it will. Okay. Again, the right to stop work for non-payment. Guys, this is probably, again, if you don't have this in your contract, this would be one that everybody should be taking advantage of and including in one form or the other. Okay? Like I said to you before, if you choose to stop work for non-payment, you may be completely liable for all types of things like warranty and everything else that can come under the sun, right? The cost to have somebody else hired. So imagine that. The homeowner turns around and sues you for breach, and charges you what it's going to cost them to replace you with the contractor because you didn't have proper terms in your contract. Okay? Worksite readiness. Again, I can't stress how many times we've used this particular clause, all right? Where we show up to a job, we've been ordered to get mobilized or to go to set up, and the job isn't ready. But they've made demand. Now, who's paying for that? Right? 9 times out of 10, by the way, we absorb this. Okay. If they choose to have, disagreements towards the end of the job around payment of any kind, we can now pull these and use them as leverage in the conversation. All right. So again, it's about de-escalation here. Hey, and we'll throw all of it at them. Okay. If they slowed us down, if we had one thing in our way, now I can use that and include that in the cost of what I'll be looking to recover. All right. And oftentimes when they see that and they can see the contract terms and how they're read and again how I've stipulated it, all right, they choose to de-escalate. They choose to, suddenly be more hospitable towards the situation. Okay. And that's the best case scenario that you can ask for. All right. So I'm not being a bully. All right. I'm only holding my ground and my boundaries with my contract. Okay. Now, again, some of these might seem off the wall to you guys, but there's always a situation that occurs. And in every job site, if you look carefully enough, there's probably, a few situations you can, painfully relate to. Make sure that you take the time when those situations that come up that you put something in your contract that avoids it from happening again. Okay? Another good example is you don't learn something like this, all right, unless you've experienced it, right? Lots of people wouldn't wake up one day and just be like, "Oh yeah, we got to throw that in." I certainly have, all right? I've been through that situation with cell phone towers and having to roof around them and not realizing that, hey, you know what? It will make everyone on your crew sick very quickly. All right. And we need to have a clause that protects us in that situation. We need to have a way of having it not be our problem. All right. Because unhooking that equipment and having those things moved can be hundreds of thousands of dollars if it can even happen at all. So again, don't get yourself stuck into those situations. Cool. So I'm just gonna quickly draw your attention, guys, before we start to get wrapped up here into our Q&A. I did provide a whole folder of contracts and terms and conditions. I don't have time to go through them all. Hopefully, there's some in there that would apply to you. I just wanted to show you quickly in terms of having your SOP around how to handle change work orders. Okay, so you guys can take pieces of it. All right, you're welcome to whatever I've shared in there. All right. Make sure that you have your attorneys review them. Again, I'm not providing legal counsel. Nothing that I've given you today is anything outside of an experienced contractor sharing some resources. So keep that in mind for me if you could. And let's go ahead with some questions. That was a lot of information. I'm sure there's got to be some questions on or situations you've come into that you'd like to discuss. You can also use the chat too if you've got questions. You're too shy to jump on the mic. I'm open to that too.
Hi, Jay. On the location for that folder, is there that link dropped in the chat?
Yeah, maybe if you came a little bit later. Let me drop it again.
Because I'm not seeing it in
Yep,
there.
let me get in. Okay. Now, we barely brushed on lots of the terms. I could probably sit here for hours and go through all the different types of, terms and conditions and clauses. What it's meant today to do is I want you guys all to really think about the basic stuff that I've covered here today. Having those clauses and terms in your contract, around change work orders, around non-payment, around stop work orders. Being able to have a discussion with a client where you're leveraging the contract versus, having verbal disputes with them on the he said, she said. So, I mean, again, if we could all, avoid those situations, you're going to protect your profits. All right. Even if it only happens once or twice a year. Okay. Once or twice a year is too much. Okay. And that can be very, very expensive. Okay, so anybody got any questions? I dropped the resource folder in there as well, guys.
Yeah, I wanted to ask, you might have already answered this. I've been in and out,
Yep.
but for a minute, but how do you present your contracts to your clients?
Yeah, so that's a great question. We have them built in the way of a proposal contract. So typically what I will do is I will withhold the terms and conditions of the contract in the first draft of the proposal. So in the first draft of the proposal, I'm going to put through, what the job's going to cost. We have some hero pages and it's more visual to get
Mhm.
them wrapped around what it is that we've proposed. And then when we've come to an agreement or they're wanting to proceed forward, I use a formal contract to sign them up to. Okay. And in that contract, we do go through and explain to them certain parts of the contract, like change work orders and stuff, because again, just having them blindly sign these, you don't want that for them either, right? It's more communication. So that's the way we're doing it. If you're in a service-based business, you don't have that option. So like if you're doing one call closes, or you're selling contract work in one sitting, it's best to have all of your terms and conditions as a part of the proposal that you're handing off to them. Okay. Same with for you guys that are doing service work, all right? Having them sign an agreement prior to working, or if you have reoccurring service work, right? So let's say, for example, you're working for a property manager, all right? That gives you consistent work. What you want to do there is you want to get a blanket contract signed. Okay. So this is a contract that they would sign at the beginning with you with the terms and conditions of that work. All right. And then it would apply to every time you do work for them under those terms and conditions. Okay. So that can be afford to be a bit longer. What other scenarios could we include there? Yeah. So again, doesn't matter what kind of work you're doing. You want to make sure that you have, formal agreements in place. Did that answer your question? Okay.
Yeah, I
Did
think
you
that
have,
yeah, that answered my question. I'm fairly new with the contracts, and so we had just been sending them over and having people after they agreed to our proposal and everything, to just send them over, and then sometimes it takes them forever to sign it. So I didn't know if I should walk it through with them and
100%.
start.
So again, you want to be able to explain because a lot of times, especially if you've got strong language in there, all right, you
Hmm.
want to be able to explain why you have that. And like I said, people tend to get very nervous around like especially like legal language. All right. Most of it, like if you read it carefully, like it's hard to understand. That can lose you jobs. All right. It's rare, but it can lose you jobs. So it's best to always explain what is most pertinent to them. Right. So when you're sitting down with them and you're presenting that contract, have a quick discussion with them. Make sure that they're comfortable with all the terms and be negotiable, right? So there are situations where we have to remove certain clauses because they're not completely fair to both sides, right? There's times when we actually add them as well. So like I said, with your contracts, why what you want to pay attention to is all the things that weren't a part of the agreement. Okay. So let me maybe give you a quick example that I was talking about before. When I do a when we have upgrades, so for example, they want to take a matte color or they want to, have eavesdrop done. Like those are like other services that we offered in the initial proposal. What we make sure of is that when they sign the agreement that they know those things aren't included. Okay, so if you've offered an upgrade or offered a better solution, and again, especially for general contractors, guys that are doing selections, right? It's so easy to slide those into what's not included. Okay, because you talk about so many different things, they may have thought that you actually included that, right? Or that this was a part of that agreement. It's best to put that right in the contract,
Yeah,
right? Just so there's no confusion. The other reason you do that is if they want to come back to that, okay? They decide that they want it. Okay, great. Pretty easy though, right? Now can we proceed with that work? Absolutely, right? We've got a change work order, we've got the original price, right? They're going to sign the change work order for that additional upgrade. If there are some of you that can't see the resources, please drop your email. Yeah, we'll email it out to you guys as well if you can't see them. Okay. So, and again, guys, I put in a lot of things to get the thoughts going around your contract, but I want to make sure that you guys understood what I was saying today, and really, can define that, hey, our contracts have to be understandable and tools that we know how to use. Okay. No sense in getting a big long contract that you have absolutely no idea what it means. Okay. And you have no ability to act on it. Okay. And again, I would say the majority of contracts are, I mean, mainly unread and misunderstood. Okay, so well worth your time to review it with review it yourself. And God's sakes, guys, update these contracts. Okay, don't just keep running the same contract year after year after year because things change, right? Just this year alone, tariffs, all of the outward pressure, escalating price clauses, all of those things that have been happening and that are changing the way that we do business. Okay. You've got to be adding to the contract. You've got to be adding to the terms based on those experiences you're having. All right. Don't just let it slide. Don't just assume it's a one-off. Okay. If it happened once, okay, you know what? We can learn from that. But if it happens twice, three times, four times, that's all on you. All right. That's you failing to be a contractor. Okay. So I want you to really, again, review your contracts. Review them with your team as well. Okay. One of the biggest things that I can say has been beneficial to us is everybody from the project manager to the sales reps, we've all spent time going over those terms and conditions. Why? Because I don't want to be the only one having the dispute conversation with clients. All right. So teach your project managers what those clauses mean and how they use them. They are tools to mitigate dispute. All right. To mitigate loss, to mitigate misunderstandings, to mitigate, customer satisfaction issues. Okay. Use them as such. All right. If you're not doing that, you're leaving yourself short. All right. And it shouldn't just be you, it should be your whole team that understand those things. Okay. All right. Any other
Did
questions, guys?
Was there a spot you had for the length of a contract? Like this is supposed to happen between July 1st, 2024 and
Oh,
September
yeah, good point.
2025,
Yeah.
because I have a project that's stalled and what I know is it was supposed to be finished by September and now we're only a third of the way in. So now we're rolling into a new time period. So it'll be some negotiation will have to happen to cover copper, for example.
Great point. So I have two clauses that protect me on that, and we're going to bring up that thing that you shared as well. But yeah, critical. So start and end dates, anticipated dates. We have a clause that specifically, again, allows us to add 5 to 10% to the job without having to get a new contract signed. It's called an escalating price clause. All right, meaning that if I was delayed, and I also have a delay clause, so if I got delayed through no fault of my own, that I'm entitled to, whatever that cost is. Okay. But on top of that, I have an escalating price clause. All right. Now I use that often as leverage. Whether the price went up or down, it doesn't matter. Okay. I can add 5 to 10% to a contract without having to go back and have it re-signed or agreed to. All right. So again, somebody's giving me a high level of dispute. We used it just recently for someone that decided not to secure their financing in time and got us to start the work. I added that 10% price escalation clause to it so that we're going to court and it's worth my while. All right. I just added 10%. I added all the one-sided legal fees. I've added so now this is getting really expensive. The interest rates, everything else. Okay. That's a deterrent in most cases. But yes, to answer your question, we have clear clauses on, if we're delayed, what happens, and in many different variations too, because delays can come from, all types of things. So again, start delays, mid-project delays, things around payments. If you want to review that, it's in my contract terms too. Again, everyone should have at least an escalation price clause. And actually, Greg, just before this call, shared something very interesting. I'm just going to share it with you guys really quick. And this was a BC court ruling And I guess it would be probably a precedent that they sent for this. So basically, a builder entered into a contract for a new home construction, but never included a completion date or never provided a completion date and the right terminology around that. So as you know, if you buy a new home, all right, it's near impossible to back out of those contracts. So when interest rates go up and all those kind of things happen, all right, a lot of these homeowners could be upside down. Well, this defendant was actually, or this homeowner was actually able to get out of their contract and have it null and void because they didn't have an estimated completion date, right? So again, these are things that you want to be aware of. It can go to your advantage and against your advantage, but really important things to kind of keep in mind and keeping up with your contracts. Another thing that I would highly recommend to everybody here is find yourself a good contract lawyer. Okay, so this isn't your general lawyer, legal lawyer, any of that. You need to find a legitimate contract lawyer, okay, that's going to review your contracts, once a year minimum. Okay, it costs you 500-600 bucks. All right, you're going to have a discussion about situations that may have happened, and he can continue to write this language into your contracts. Okay, again, guys, this saves so much time, so much money, so much heartache that I can't stress it enough. And then locally, provincial, or locally, statewide, provincially, and federally, our laws are constantly changing. All right. Things around payment, obligations. I know in Ontario we have we recently went through a big change where, they're not supposed to be withholding payments for 90 days. Okay. And our rights to lien and things like that have changed. You have to stay up to date on these things. Okay. I see a lot of guys get in trouble where they haven't reviewed their contracts in 10 years and they're using language in there that's been deemed, like they can't use it. One of the ones that I can remember most recently was, putting an unfair interest rate in, saying 10% per month and stuff like that. Well, we actually have laws that protect the consumer in that situation, and they can't be charged an unfair interest rate. But still, 10 years ago, you could. All right. So again, you want to have these things reviewed. You want to have them updated for the cost that it is. I mean, it's nothing in comparison to one litigation case. Okay. So anybody that's been to litigation, anybody that's had to invest in a litigation dispute knows, all right? Nobody wins in those situations. Nobody ever wins. All right. It's all loss for everybody. Okay. And all you're looking to do is survive it because it's expensive. All right. Again, even for minor things, lean stuff like that. So the whole point of my conversation today is to prevent it from happening. That should always be the very last resort. And if it does go that way, you want to give yourself the highest chance of winning and taking advantage of the um, one-sided attorney fee. Okay. And if there's no other questions, guys, anybody else have any other things that they would like to ask? Right, we'll make a final call on this. If nobody has any other questions, hopefully you've got all the resources. Oh, by the way, if anybody's interested in having another contractor review their contract or talk about the strategy around using contracts, feel free to book a call with us. We're here to help. Again, love to discuss those things with you if it's helpful and it's productive. So feel free to book a call. We'll drop a link for that as well. And I hope everybody got a win and a takeaway from today. We'll talk to you soon. Bye for now.